So, as a network administrator in my professional life outside of podcasting, I find myself on a website called Down Detector a lot. If you don't know what Down Detector is, basically it's a website that you can go on and it provides like community sourced information on whether or not a service is down. Basically, you can go there if you're having like internet issues or having issues accessing a website like Reddit or Spotify or whatever. And you can go and check and see if other people are reporting that the site's down. It's kind of just like community source up down status of certain services. And I go on there a good bit because there's a lot of, we use a lot of big providers at work, be it for cloud services or different ISPs, stuff like that. Anyway, I find myself on the website a lot. And if you go on the website, if you just go to downdetector.com, this is not an ad for Down Detector. If you go on downdetector.com, there's a kind of almost like a dashboard of different services that are reporting down. And I think on the main page, they show the most like viewed or checked services of the day, just so you can kind of see if there's big outages or anything going on. So I was on there the other day looking for something for work, and there was one particular service or website down that struck me because it said that AOL, America Online, was down. And I don't know about you, listener, podcast enjoyer. I haven't thought about AOL in probably about 20 years. Like, I know that they've still got some email services out there because I know somebody that has an AOL email, but I have never given any thought to the fact that AOL was still functioning beyond email. So I went to the website just to see, and sure enough, yeah, if you go to AOL.com, it's still a thing. So if you don't know, there's a lot of younger people on the internet now, I understand. AOL was a service now probably going on 30 years ago was when it was in its prime. It was a dial-up service provider. It was an internet service provider back. They were pretty much the biggest dial-up provider in the nation for a hot minute when dial-up was big. And I have very distinct memories of AOL as a child because they used to have pretty much anywhere you would go in public, they would have these little either floppy disks or CDs that you could take. And it was basically later on in the life of AOL, it kind of became like software and stuff that you could download. But originally what it was minutes that you could use for such a weird thing to talk about in 2024. It was minutes that you could use to access the internet for a certain amount of time, like a free trial for being able to access it. And as a kid, I used to take those DVDs or those CDs and floppy disks just as a klepto. I used to take all kinds of free literature and pretty much anything that was advertised as free I would take. And that always stuck with me because I always remember I had a pile. I never used them for anything, but I always had a pile of just AOL DVDs and floppy disks in my room somewhere because I would just take them and stick them in my pocket when I was a kid. And so that kind of, it was interesting because that's probably the last time I thought about AOL was 20 years ago. So it got me thinking, like, what happened to AOL after it fell off the whole dial-up craze? Because obviously in the early 2000s when dial-up went away, AOL lost a lot of relevancy. So I did a little bit of Googling and did a little searching this morning. And so in the early 2000s, AOL was massive. Well, I'd say the 90s into the early 2000s, it was absolutely massive. It was the biggest dial-up provider in the country, millions and millions of customers. About 2001, it got bought out by Time Warner Cable, which Time Warner Cable went on to become Spectrum, which is now one of the largest internet providers. Actually, I think it is the largest cable provider in the country. It might be eclipsed by Comcast. It's the first or second largest internet provider in the country anyway. But they got bought out. AOL got bought out by Time Warner in 2001 for a whopping $350 billion. It's billion with a B. And not long after that, it was kind of a poor investment because not long after that, broadband cable became a thing. And, as the internet started to grow, more people adopted broadband cable because it was less cumbersome than DSL. And it was a much better service that offered better reliability and, just better speeds, all that good stuff. So it kind of existed for a while. 2010, they kind of focused the shift of AOL toward media brands and advertising. Guessing that just kind of means like just getting presence out there, getting, using it as an advertisement agency. Mid 2010s, about 2015 or so, it got sold to Verizon. I remember the last time it got sold, it was sold for $350 billion. When Verizon bought it, they bought it for $4.4 billion, which is still an asinine amount of money to spend on a brand that probably hasn't been relevant at that point in almost 15 years. So from there, it turned around and sold again in 2021, 6 years later. It actually made a little bit of money on that because they turned around and sold it to Yahoo for $5 billion, which again, absolutely crazy, given the fact that I'm sure if I walked up to anybody on the street and asked when the last time they thought about AOL, probably mid 2000s. So it's insane that, 20 years after it sold for $350 billion, it still turned around. It became completely irrelevant and still turned around and sold for $5 billion. Today, it still does offer email service and acts as kind of like a news aggregate. I didn't do a ton of research into the exact modernity of it, but I'm sure they still also offer a lot of the online presence and media advertising, stuff like that. But it's just absolutely insane. That within the last 5 years, AOL has sold for $5 billion. I mean, Mojang that created Minecraft, I'm pretty sure Mojang sold for, I think it was $2 billion. And Minecraft is huge. Minecraft is still relevant. It's everywhere. And AOL sold for $5 billion 2 years ago. That gives you something to think about. Here's your little bit of internet trivia, internet history for the day. This is Anecdotal Madness. My name is Chris. It's a podcast where I talk about stuff for like 15 to 20 minutes and people listen. There's some very talkative birds today. I don't know if it's picking up on audio. I hope it's picking up on audio. The birds are they're talking. Listen to that. I say listen to that, and there's a car driving by, which is great. So I had things that I had thought about talking about on this episode, and then I recorded that intro yesterday because I used the power of podcast magic to make it seem like this is all one recording session. It's not. It's the magic of the show. It's usually recorded in multiple segments. But I went down a rabbit hole kind of after I did a little bit of research on AOL, and I was like, there's other brands from that period of time that I haven't thought about in a while. So I looked up a few. This isn't like a definitive list of early 2000s brands or early to mid 2000s or 90s 2000s. This isn't a definitive list of defunct brands. This is just stuff that I thought about. The first one that came to mind for me, and I don't know, this might be specific to like a region, or I'm not sure how prevalent this brand was, but there's a brand that was called Big Dogs. And I remember it because I remember there was a physical store location that my family was enamored with. I don't understand why to this day. I think my mom still has some of the apparel. It was an apparel store, and they sold shirts that had pictures of St. Bernards on them. That's all I remember about it. I actually had to do a little bit of Google searching to see if this was even a real brand or if this is something that I had a fever dream about. But no, it's a real actual brand. And yeah, they're still around. So they don't have any brick and mortar stores anymore, but they do still have a pretty bumping online presence. I actually looked through their website. There are some shirts that I would wear on there. So it was neat. Blockbuster is still technically around. It's not all the way around. I need to do a little bit more. I should have done a little bit more reading on it, but there is one store left in Bend, Oregon. And I think I feel like it's a pretty commonly known fact. At least I knew it. It was one that I thought about, or at least seen on Reddit a few times. But yeah, they're still trucking. They've got one store. They seem to, I imagine most of their income probably comes. They've got some merch that you can buy online. Again, shirts I would wear. That could be a whole segment on this show. It's just shirts I would wear. But yeah, they've got a pretty thriving business in Bend, Oregon still. Blockbuster.com is also still active. They've got I went on there today. Honestly, I don't know if I've ever been to the Blockbuster website. But I went, they had a screen up that said, like, we're rewinding your movie. Stand by. We'll be back later. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means they're about to make some big revival. I was thinking about it. Blockbuster would have a really unique opportunity if they could pull it off to come back as like a universal streaming service and try and pull a bunch of streaming services together. I don't know. That's just an idea. I'm tired of, I feel like at this point, not to go too far on a tangent from my tangent, but I feel like streaming services have just absolutely gotten out of hand, because that's what killed Blockbuster, right? It was streaming services, it was Netflix, just the convenience of people being able to watch stuff at home or have movies delivered to home, as was how Netflix began. I feel like just, streaming services, Netflix came in and they just wrecked the world. Everybody loved it. It was like Netflix and Hulu were the two big ones, and then all these cable companies, not cable companies, but like the channel networks, your Paramounts and your Discoveries and everything, they were like, oh, we can make money on this, we'll just make a streaming service for our channel. And at this point, my wife and I have talked about this several times. I'm fairly confident I pay more for streaming services, because admittedly we have a lot of streaming services because I like to watch a lot of shows, and we probably pay as much or more for those streaming services than we do for cable. Anyway, that's Blockbuster. The last brand that came to mind that I thought about was Nokia. Because I feel like Nokia was this huge, it was a titan in the phone industry. And everybody knows about like the indestructible Nokia, the old, I can't even remember the name of the phone. I probably should have looked it up before this. Actually, let me look it up. It was the Nokia 3310. Yeah, the Nokia 3310. That was the kind of meme phone that I guess it kind of people made memes out of, but it was said to be indestructible. And it really was, because I know a lot. My mom and my grandma both had that phone, and my grandma had that phone up until I think like 5 or 6 years ago. It was the same phone that she bought in like 2003, 2004. And I distinctly remember, my biggest memory with those phones is I remember playing, there was a little bowling game that you could play on that Nokia phone, the 3310. I always remember playing that on. Always when I think about that phone, that's what I think about, is that bowling game. But Nokia's still around, apparently. In fact, in I think 2021 or 2022, I should have written it down, they signed a contract with NASA to work on building a 4G mobile network on the moon. The moon. They're going to put 4G on the moon, which is pretty crazy. It's supposed to, it makes sense. We want to have communications. There's a lot of talk right now about going back to the moon. People just decided, we haven't been there in like 60 years. It's time to go back. But yeah, I guess that's their new thing. They seem like they've kind of backed away from the phone market after the whole Windows Phone thing fell down, which I'll get into that here in a little bit. But it's just, Nokia is building a 4G network for astronauts on the moon. It makes sense from a science standpoint. Like, we have a lot of modern technology. 4G is a very stable mobile network. It makes sense, but it's just that doesn't sound like a sentence I ever expected to say. Or just 4G wireless on the moon just seems kind of wild. So I don't know. I don't really know where they're at with that. I think when I was looking online earlier, when I made my notes for this episode, I think they said they signed that contract with NASA in like 2021, 2022. So it's been like a year or two. I don't think the US has landed anything on the moon. I think China has recently, or maybe it was Japan. Another country landed something on the moon recently. I don't think the US has, so I presume Nokia has not made a ton of progress as setting up 4G on the moon. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to go about setting up 4G on the moon, but that's something that they're gonna head toward. It seems like most of their current projects that I could tell just thumbing through Wikipedia, most of their current projects seem to be related to mobile networking. They seem like they've pretty much backed out of the actual mobile device game, from what I can tell, which is fine. Mobile networking is, obviously very, very important these days, and to have a titan like that working on it's pretty cool. But one thing I did want to talk about, I kind of want to go down another rabbit hole on, is the Windows Phone. So the Windows Phone, I had one. I had a Nokia Lumia Icon, and I will come out and say it. I'm going to be the person that says it. I had a Windows Phone, and I loved my Windows Phone. I had one when it came out. I think that phone came out in like 2014-ish. I loved that phone. I still have this phone. It still boots up. So I've got it in a drawer in my closet for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why, but I do. And that phone, every few years, I'll stumble across it and I'll go, oh, that's fun. And I'll just boot it up to see if it still boots up. And yep, it still boots up. It's fine. It holds charge. It was a great phone. Ironically, that was actually the phone that got me into photography, because that was the first phone I ever remember having that had a decent camera. Because for a long time, and I think a lot of younger people who don't remember smartphones back of the early 2010s, the early smartphones, or just phone cameras in general, they were, I mean, it was literally there for you to be able to take a picture. Like it gave you the ability to take a picture. And I remember that being the very first smartphone where it was advertised. This is back before, all the every new phone was basically a camera ad, and they had 3 lenses on the back of the phone. That was the first phone I ever remember seeing advertised for its picture taking ability. And I don't know what caught me about that, but that was the biggest thing that sold me on it. And at this point in my life, I was not really big into photography. It was something that interested me, but it wasn't something I was big into. Not like today where I've got, mirrorless SLRs or DSLRs, I guess, and, I have lenses, and I actually do real photography in my spare time sometimes. And but I remember getting that phone, and there's 2 things that I can say about that phone. Is number one, I think even to this day the camera holds up pretty well. I was looking at a couple. I've got a few pictures I actually took with that phone, and they're not as good as what I can take. I've got a Galaxy 24 Plus now. I think it's 24 or 24 Plus. I think it's a Plus. It's not an Ultra. But it's a 24 Plus. That's what it is, yeah. It's got the big 3 camera thing, and it takes some fantastic pictures. It takes some great pictures. There's obviously a difference between those 2 phones. I can tell a difference between those 2 phones. But looking at that phone and thinking, this came out 10 years ago. This came out in 2014, back when, it was like Apple was the laughing stock of the phone world because of the fact that they took such bad pictures. And to just see the quality that was being put out by that Nokia was really cool. It's really neat. And I remember the first picture I ever took, actually, that made me think, hey, I could do photography. Photography would be fun. I took with that phone because I actually went with a friend of mine to a Civil War reenactment, and him and his dad are big into photography, and they're walking around with their big cameras, and I'm like, I got my Nokia, and it's got a button on it that takes you to the camera. You can click on it and it pulls your camera up. You can click on it again, it takes a picture. So I'm a real photographer. But no, I was walking around and I was taking pictures, and I took one specific picture. I still have this picture. I think it's actually I have a rotation of background images on my desktop, and I think it's still in that rotation. I'll see if I can find it. But I took a picture down the barrel of it was an actual Civil War era cannon. And I just wanted to see if I could take a picture with the flash on and see like the grooving in the barrel of the cannon. So I thought it looked cool. And I took the picture and I was looking at it later and I'm like, holy crap, this is actually a good quality picture. It's a neat quality picture. And that was kind of that in that moment was when I was really like, I think I'd like to try photography a little bit more seriously. And, I wound up getting a camera and kind of so on and so forth. I have an Instagram you can check out if you want to see some of the actual pictures I've done. I haven't really done it super recently, any photography super recently, but I like to think I do pretty decent when I decide to. But anyway, I've gone way off base, way off track from talking about it. But yeah, I loved I have that Nokia phone, or I had that Nokia phone. I loved that Nokia phone. It was just, the UI was super simple. It was super easy to use. I hated that UI on a desktop, but I loved that old, I think it was Windows Phone 8. I don't think it was 10 yet. I think it was Windows 8 at that point. The mobile operating system was based off of Windows 8. And I remember it was just like a really simple, easy to use UI. And that phone, to this very day, is still the most indestructible piece of technology I have ever used. Like, people talk about that 3310 like it's indestructible. That was a smartphone that not a day I owned that phone, and I carried that phone for like 3 or 4 years. There was not a day that came around that I put a screen protector on it or I had a case on it. That phone raw dogged reality for at least 3 years. And the glass never got a scratch. I dropped it. I ran it over. I stepped on it. That phone was indestructible. I mean, it definitely showed wear and tear, especially around the edges. There was definitely some dents and dings. But that phone was damn near indestructible. And I will forever remember that phone because I haven't had a single phone since then that I have felt safe enough not having it in a case. Nokia knows how to make phones. I hate that Windows operating system. I get why it never worked out in the long run because it didn't have any app support. That was actually part of the reason I quit using that phone because I love the phone. I'm sure if I stuck a SIM card in it today, it would still work. But the reason I stopped using that phone was because that was around the time I started working in IT full time. And when you work in IT, a lot of times, especially when you're on the road, you've got to have apps on your phone, to be able to interface with stuff or work with stuff. It's before I worked at a company that gave you a phone. So I kind of had to work off my own phone. The VPNs didn't work with it. So I broke down and I went back to Android, which I like my Samsung. I do. I've had 2 Samsung phones now since 2019, and I've loved both of them. I only upgraded recently from it was 2020 because I had a S20 FE for a long time. FE 5G because I had 5G. It was fancy. It's one of the early 5G phones. Well, early. It was an earlier 5G smartphone. Earlier this year, I picked up a S24 Plus because my battery was starting to die in my S20. And I've been super happy with the Samsung phone ever since. That's your little bit of internet history for today. Or not necessarily even just internet history, just I guess technological history. I don't even think that was really history. I think I just kind of went on a rant about phones that I've had for a while. That was fun. So, as always, I should probably wrap this episode up. I think I'm starting to run a little bit long here. So, if you listen to this, thank you very much for taking some time to listen. Please feel free to follow on any platform that has podcasts. Drop a rating. You can check us out. All of our content, not just my content. If you like me talking, but don't like just me talking, we've got more content. We have 3 other shows that we do, and I'm on all of them because I'm super involved with this. Check out stuckontheinternet.com. It's a great website. It's an awesome website built by yours truly. It shows all of our podcasts, and it's got all of our social media. If you don't want to do that, you can check us out on Instagram and Twitter at Stuck on Internet. You can also check out our subreddit, r/StuckOnTheInternet. As always, folks, thanks for tuning in. Check us out. I'll be back next Thursday with some random topic to talk about for about 20 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.